Welcome to the mainstream, where we give a voice to the mainstream. John.
Get around it. We are the mainstream.
Get around it. Well, something Australians are not getting around is net zero. We've had Robert Bryce, who's one of the leading experts on energy around the world here in Australia, with the IPA, talking to Australians about why net zero is a terrible, terrible idea.
Did we need convincing?
Well, I think a lot of people do need convincing, but
the coalition needs convincing.
The coalition needs convincing, John, but I've got a big prediction that I've recently made.
What is it?
Which is that the coalition is going to dump net zero this year. And it's for all the reasons Robert has been talking about. Did you know this, John? This is one of Robert's main points. He says, since 2008, the year 2008, the amount of solar and wind energy in our system has gone from 0% to 1/3. And guess what's happened to energy prices?
But power prices would have come down because we're told that renewable energy is the cheapest form of energy, Dan.
It's the cheapest, except it's the most expensive at the same time. The prices have gone up by 250% over that time. So we've had Robert here talking about these issues, and we're seeing, I think, a big change in the debate. We've seen South Australian Liberals say they're not doing net zero, New South Wales Nationals saying they're not doing net zero. So this is the year that the coalition is going to dump net zero.
So why would the coalition do this now? Scott Morrison took it to the election. It was an electoral disaster. Peter Dutton stuck with it and used nuclear as an excuse to not talk about net zero. Why is Susan Lee, the new opposition leader, going to be any different from Morrison, Dutton or Turnbull?
Well, there's a couple of reasons. I think one is that they don't actually have a policy at the moment. So they had, as you say, quite rightly, they had nuclear.
Excuse me for laughing.
They had nuclear.
Yeah.
But the only reason they adopted nuclear was because
it was a Band-Aid.
They didn't want to dump net zero.
Yeah.
So they defaulted their way into nuclear.
Yeah.
Now, I don't think they're going to continue with that policy anymore.
Yeah.
They're not going to adopt Labor's policy. So the only one left is to get rid of net zero. So I think for whatever reason, that's the way they're going to go with it. So I think it's an encouraging thing.
And I think it's positive, and it's going to be significant because it will create a debate in the same way as when the Nationals came out, led by Senator Price, and said, we are not going to support the voice, and then they dragged the Liberal Party to a position. It created a debate, and then it gave a permission structure for people to say what they always believed, which is we have all of this energy, we have these resources. Net zero is affecting our capacity to feed ourselves, to defend ourselves. It's driving manufacturing offshore. Let's kill it.
Yeah. And these are the points that Robert's made in his tour here. But have you also seen the Tony Blair Institute?
Well, I have, but this has been buried in Australia.
This has been buried. But
Yeah.
I was going through this report before. There's a lot of good things in there, but the most interesting stat I found was this one. I don't know if you've heard this one yet, but he says in this report, in 2024 alone, China initiated the construction of 95 gigawatts of new, so not existing, but new coal-fired power energy, which is, listen to this, which is almost as much as the total current energy output from coal of all of Europe put together. So much less what we do here. I mean, as Robert points out, we've gone from 1.5% of global emissions to 1.1% of global emissions. So what we do makes no discernible difference.
Yeah, so I reckon, and this is like, what is the stat that China's building 2 new coal-fired power stations a week or something similar? But that is their statistics and their facts and their reasons. How do we defeat the emotion of net zero? How do we defeat the virtue signalling? How do we well, people used to say, I have a Tesla, I'm better than you, and now all my lefty friends can't say that anymore. It's so cool. But they're still not selling their Teslas. How do we defeat emotion? Everyone has signed up to this. Does the Liberal Party then and the coalition come out and say, we got it wrong?
Well, yeah, I think you do. I think you've got to be...
So the last politician who said, I got it wrong is...
blank. But I think you make an important point. So I reckon if you went to the typical person on the street and you said to them, why do you reckon energy prices are going up so much? Yeah. I reckon they'd say, number one is energy companies are ripping me off. Number two, Ukraine war. Number three, aging coal-fired power stations. If you said to them, what's the solution? More money in renewables, more money in batteries and storage. Because that's what they've been told. And as you say, there's been no actual contest about this whatsoever. So I think the first thing that needs to be done is to actually tell the community that the problem is net zero. They don't actually know that at the moment. And then I think the second thing is you've got to communicate. This isn't just about energy prices. This is a complete reconceptualisation of how government works in Australia. It's not just energy. It's the food you can eat, the cars you can drive, the homes you can live in, the industry that you can have. It is a complete attack on the liberal democratic way of our nation, which is Labor has always done, going back to the 1940s when they tried to increase the war powers into the peacetime era. This is the modern version of that.
And that's what we have to explain. And I actually think we go, just like The Voice, I think we're going to be pushing against an open door. So it's always been the case that notwithstanding all the public information about climate change, or so-called information, you still have 30 or 40% of the public who are unsure about...
Without any debate.
Without any debate, who are unsure about the science. You have a very low proportion of people who want to pay more than $100 a year to implement net zero. And the challenge is going to be for the coalition to create a story around why it has signed up to something so wrong and so damaging for so long, and then give people a permission structure to walk away from allowing 12-year-olds to leave school to hold a placard in the streets of Australia saying, "Save the planet because we're drowning."
Well, something Australians don't need a permission structure for is our flag. Right, and this is another...
How many flags? Which flag?
One flag.
How many flags are we talking about?
One flag, and one flag only. We did a survey on this.
That's a very controversial
Well, it's controversial.
One flag.
It's controversial on Collins Street. It's not controversial anywhere else in the country, John, because we commissioned a independent firm, Dynata, to do a survey of Australians' attitudes towards our flag and our symbols, and I'll give you a couple of examples of the outcomes. So this was 1,005 Australians that were asked in a nationally representative sample that we did in mid-May. And the first question that we asked, whether you agree or disagree, was the Australian flag unites all Australians. 71% said they agree. 13% disagree, 16% unsure.
So we've got to work on 13%.
We've got to work on 13%, but pretty good. And then for 18 to 24-year-olds, 59% agree, 19% disagree.
That's a good outcome.
That's a good outcome. And
so why do we keep on saying that young people are green and left-wing and hate the country?
They're not. I don't think they are, overwhelmingly not. They're more likely to, but they've just come out of 16 years of relentless indoctrination, and still a decent number of them are turning out...
And they still like the flag.
They still like the flag. Yeah. But this is my favourite one about the national anthem. You know, I don't think that we... My only quibble is I think Waltzing Matilda should be the anthem, not the current anthem that we have.
I don't mind Advance Australia Fair.
You don't mind it?
I just wish I knew what the second verse was.
Yes, yeah. Well, at the school my daughter goes to, they sing the two. Two verses.
That's pretty good.
Two verses. So
I thought you were going to say
two anthems.
They sing two anthems.
I wish. We know we'd be on then.
Well, it should be God Save the King.
But the question we asked was, do you agree or disagree the national anthem should be sung at school assemblies? So 73% agree, 8% disagree, 19% unsure. But again, for those on the youngest cohort, 18 to 24, 70% agree, 9% disagree, 21. Yeah.
So here's a question.
So why is this so controversial?
Well, so I'm going to ask, I don't think it is. It's because the political class deliberately want to thumb their noses at us. But then I have a question for you. So quite clearly when Peter Dutton said he was only going to stand in front of one flag, it struck a chord. You could tell it struck a chord, and Labor were afraid of the debate because Labor said, we can't talk about this, shut it down, it's a culture war, it's a culture war. But then why does Anthony Albanese and federal Labor ministers still stand in front of three flags, not one, when quite clearly the public's view is not that?
Because they can get away with it. They're not challenged by it. The coalition is
the coalition challenged them for about 5 minutes, and then Peter Dutton walked away.
Yeah, because they're too cowardly to take on the debate.
Yeah.
They get afraid of getting called names. They get intimidated. They wake up and read the Age newspaper in the morning, and it tells them that they're bad people, so they stop it.
And then they turn on Radio National, on the ABC, and they're told the same thing.
Yeah. That's what happens. I can guarantee you that that's exactly what happens. They believe it's a distraction from the issues that actually matter, without understanding that this is an issue that matters to Australians.
So our national identity doesn't matter.
Our national identity doesn't matter. So I think it's all of that. Plus, I think the fundamental thing is a lot of political leaders don't have a language to talk about it. They don't feel comfortable because they don't really know how to talk about it. They think it's silly, like it's a flag. Oh, who cares about a flag?
It's a song.
It's just a song.
Yeah. It's just a welcome to country.
A flag is more than colours on a fabric. It's a statement of sovereignty. That's why I think the three flags is so radical because you're actually making a challenge to the notion of sovereignty, and it also represents our shared values. Everybody knows that under the flag, we belong together. We belong together. A shared community of values. So I think they've forgotten the language of how to talk about national identity. And I think they're also afraid of getting called Trumpists.
Yeah, and they're afraid of having to engage in a debate on culture, exactly as you said, and they're afraid of it because they don't engage in these debates very often.
Paul Erickson, who's the National Secretary of the Labor Party, and he ran the Labor campaign.
Very successfully.
He did. Well, yeah, but I mean, how hard did you have to try?
Well, you can only defeat the competition that's been sent on the field against you.
But everyone says it was a great campaign. It's like, was it that hard to say they're going to cut money to pay for nuclear plants?
Yeah, was it that hard to say we're going to borrow money from future generations to give you a cash handout as a result of the policies that we are inflicting upon you?
Yes, apparently not.
Yeah,
but he made
funny
the
how
point,
Peter Dutton couldn't rebut any of that.
No, but he made the point at a National Press Club address where he said words to the effect of the coalition, the polling turned against the coalition because they were distracted by culture wars rather than talking about the cost of living. Now, I was a candidate. There was no discussion of the culture. The only time culture issues were discussed was when Penny Wong actually admitted the truth, which is that they're going to do the voice to parliament anyway, and the community was very upset about it. But there was no argument about culture throughout the entire election campaign. And the reason he's saying that is because he knows, exactly as what you said, the centre-right is actually at its strongest when we're talking about culture, and Labor and the left are at their weakest and most divided. So he doesn't want a debate. He knows that Labor will always win an argument about the cost of living, because people trust Labor with social security and welfare. They trust Labor to look after them in difficult economic times. And one of the things I found interesting was you talk to Liberal Party pollsters and strategists, and they'll say, yeah, but we do so well on the economy. So when the debate is about the economy, we win. When the debate is about health or social security, Labor wins. So we just have to talk about the economy. And I would say, I agree with you, but the economy is abstract. The economy doesn't mean anything to people's lives. The cost of living means something to people's lives. And on the cost of living, Labor is more trusted in the community than the coalition. And that's why they won.
Yeah, and I was surprised. Well, I wasn't actually surprised because the stupidity of some people who say they want the Liberal Party to win never surprises me. But this claim that the Liberal Party should follow Paul Erickson because he said Liberals shouldn't talk about culture and therefore Liberals and Conservatives shouldn't. As if Paul Erickson wants to help the Liberal Party. This always, and I wrote about it during the campaign, you can tell when you strike a nerve. The first time anyone from the left or the Labor Party says culture war, you know you are over the target, which is where the strafe is the strongest. And it was one of the many failures of the coalition campaign. So you mentioned the campaign, 6 weeks on. Have you recovered? So tell us what you were doing, where you were, and how'd you go?
Well, on the first one, what was I doing? I don't know. But no, I was a candidate for the Liberal Party in the seat of Spence in the outer northern suburbs.
So you're originally from Adelaide?
I am from
Adelaide. Born and bred Adelaide?
Born and bred Adelaide. We live in Adelaide, and I was a candidate in the outer northern suburbs.
So that's around Elizabeth?
Centred around Elizabeth. Yep. So this is where Holden's used to have their manufacturing, others as well, like Levi's, and it was sort of the hub of manufacturing and industry in Australia. Sadly, many of those jobs have now gone and much of the industry has disappeared. But I was a candidate there.
And what was the margin that you were up against?
It was a 12% Labor seat. So safe Labor area.
Winnable? Did you?
I think it is. Well, I had a strong dose of candidate-itis, which is that if you don't believe you're going to win, you're never going to do it, right? Because you've got to get up every morning and you've got to get out there and work hard. And if you don't believe you're going to win, you won't do it. So I did believe I could win. And I believe it's a winnable seat in certain contexts, in part because of the culture, a 72% no vote in that seat, which is the biggest
Isn't that where Albanese launched the Yes campaign?
Yeah, that's exactly right. They launched it at the Elizabeth Civic Centre, which is just near the Elizabeth Shopping Centre. That's really the epicentre of the northern suburbs of Adelaide. And the booth that's physically closest to where they launched the Yes campaign had a 75% no vote. Right, so if you ever needed a symbol of how out of touch Labor is with its voting base, that's it. And that was one of the reasons that motivated me to run for that seat. And I was always frustrated that the broader Liberal Party apparatus wouldn't actually lean into that reality that the modern Labor Party is not the Labor Party of Bob Hawke.
They're not the Labor Party of the working class.
They're not. But the Liberal Party is not the party of the working class at the moment either. We haven't done enough to win the confidence of the community. Like if you ask people what does the Liberal Party stand for, most people will say I've got no idea. Then they'll say big business, and then they'll say rich people. Now we can say that's fair or unfair, but that's just the reality of it. They think we're nasty people that's going to take their money.
So how did
that's
you go?
The sentiment.
Presumably you didn't win if you're talking to me on this podcast.
No, I didn't win. But we had the lowest swing against us in the state of South Australia, and we got swings towards us in 16 out of 45 booths on voting day. So, and these were all around the working class areas. So every single booth in Elizabeth, so Elizabeth Downs, Elizabeth East, Elizabeth Grove, Elizabeth North, Elizabeth Park, Elizabeth Vale, Elizabeth South, all swaying towards Liberal. The biggest was Salisbury North, 5.6% swing towards Liberal. So this was sort of a microcosm of the fact that, hey, this is actually, people will respond if you dignify them with your time, because many voters there had never seen
They'd never seen a Liberal.
No.
And
So
I
you
know
actually-
because I was out helping you. It was a fantastic 3 or 4 days, and they had never seen a person ask them to vote Liberal.
No. Much less knock on their door and ask them how's it going.
So when you knocked on their door, what did they say?
Oh, a variety of things.
What are their concerns?
Well, I think firstly, there's a certain number of people that don't like the fact that you've knocked on their door, but that's very small.
Yeah.
Right? Most people go, oh, wow, like you've actually taken the time to talk with me. Most people's concerns are hyper-local. The local playground, like for example, one of the areas, Riverlea, that I was door knocking, there's a new playground, but it doesn't have a fence around it. So the kids are running onto the road. So it's very hyper-local.
And did you say that's not really a federal government issue? Raise it with your local council? Or you said, I will get you a $20,000 grant to fence the playground?
I'd happily do that. But people don't delineate between... I mean, understandably, people just
You're
want
the
their
federal
problems-
member, just make it happen.
They just want their problems fixed,
Yeah.
which is understandable.
Yep.
But I think the other key takeaway was the level of voter disengagement and apathy. There's a deep sense that nothing changes. Who cares? It doesn't matter who I vote for. No one listens. They're all in it for themselves. The Labor vote, Labor smashed the election, but there was no real enthusiasm to vote Labor. I mean, you might have seen this on the booths that you were manning. People weren't like, I can't wait to vote Labor. I can't wait to vote for Albo.
They did it they voted Labor out of sullenness.
Yeah.
And of course, as we know, Labor won with a very low primary vote. It was the bottom falling out of the Conservative vote.
Yep.
And not just the Liberal Party and National Party. Well, the National Party didn't fall that much, but the other centre-right parties, that's where Labor succeeded and the Conservatives failed. And for me, one of the challenges was Peter Dutton and the coalition spent 3 years talking about the problems of net zero, but they said we're still going to keep net zero. They had no tax policies. They had an education policy that was only released 2 days before the campaign. And the scale of the problems that the coalition presented was not matched by the scale of the answers.
Yep.
The scale of the solutions.
Well,
It was minor.
What actually happened was the effectiveness of the coalition in prosecuting the argument the economy was stuffed actually pushed people to Labor.
Yep.
Because Liberal Party didn't really have a solution. And the other thing was, insofar as they had solutions, for example, cutting fuel excise, which I thought was a good policy, but you actually, because the media market is so fractured, you can't just get a story in the newspapers, then go on the nightly news. It takes probably 6 to 9 months to have an argument penetrate into the public because, people are listening and engaging with all different kinds of content that it has to actually get through and seep through all these different kinds of content. You can't just do this centralised process, which is what they relied on.
And everyone watches the 6 p.m. news to get
It's
the
what
line.
it used to be.
But not now.
20 years ago. One thing I want to ask you about, though, is I reckon that I think about different ages. So if you think about, before there was sort of television, if you were a political candidate, you had to go to a town hall, talk in front of 5,000 people heckling you, people asking you questions, and you had to be able to handle that.
I mean, there are the great images. So I've done a lot of work on the conscription debates of the First World War. Billy Hughes stands out on a balcony in Martin Place in Sydney, and he's speaking to thousands of people, and some are agreeing and some are screaming at him.
And I think that forges a certain kind of political character.
And Menzies was the best at it.
Yeah.
Yeah, even Doc Evatt would do it. You'd turn up to town halls and you'd have a debate and an argument. Yeah, it does. Yeah.
And then you had sort of the TV age.
Yeah.
And that became the archetypical thing was Nixon versus JFK, which is one of the things. And then Nixon was better on substance, but JFK was a better TV character.
And people who listened to the debate on radio thought that Nixon won. People who watched the TV thought Kennedy had won.
Yeah, so TV then forged a certain kind of political character, and that became perfected.
And that gave us a 7-second grab.
7-second grab. So that was that.
Be presentable and look nice.
And now we're in the social media age, which is, again, forging a different kind of political character that comes out of that cauldron. Now, I think we're still 10 or 15 years away from the peak of the social media age, because I think you could say the TV age peaked in probably the 90s, late 90s. I think we're getting there as the generations come through, but it's a different kind of political character that's forged through the medium by which they have to communicate to the public. It's a totally different...
And one of the things that we're seeing is, and again, we saw this from the IPA's own survey on The Voice, that a tiny fraction of young people, let's say under the age of 25, go to the mainstream press, go to the mainstream media for their news. They're on social media. But the thing that is most important about this new age, which I think has got lots of exciting aspects to it, is about authenticity.
Yep.
So Donald Trump goes on Rogan, and was it 2 or 3?
A couple of hours.
Yeah, 2 or 3 hours.
2 or 3 hours, yeah.
And it's authentic. And he's talking, what did he talk about? Dinosaurs and Martians. And it's
UFOs.
Crazy. And
Joe Rogan's favourite topic is aliens. Aliens.
I thought it was whether dinosaurs exist.
No, you have a shot every time he talks about aliens or the pyramids.
And it's authentic. Yeah. It's crazy, but it's authentic. It's real. And when you see Albanese do it during the campaign, or even Dutton, it wasn't real. People are craving this authenticity. They're craving debate. They're just craving some analysis and discussion. And for me, one of the most exciting things, and this happened upwards of 10 years ago when, for example, Peterson's and Rogan's podcasts first started. You know, we talk about young people not being engaged. They will watch an hour. They will watch 2 or 3 hours of Dave Rubin talking, of Mark Steyn engaged in a debate. And I think, you know, this is going to be changing the entire landscape for the political class. But it does mean, exactly as you say, you can't announce a policy 2 weeks before an election. No. And Albanese paid the influencers to go on their program, so they weren't going to ask him any actual questions. Yeah. Just, I'll take the money and just say, here, you're great, Albanese. So and the other thing is, I think for a long time, the centre-right, not just in Australia but around the world, thought that social media was a vehicle of the left. It absolutely isn't. And so what happens when the centre-right start to use debate? They start to communicate to young boys who hadn't been communicated to. The government, of course, wants to censor social media. Yeah. And I was actually thinking just the other day, what are we now? We're nearly the end of June, and we still have no idea how the Albanese government's under 16 social media ban is going to work. It's meant to come in next year. It's meant to come in at the end of this year. Beginning of next year. Yep. And as I've said and as I've written, and I think it's slowly starting to dawn upon people, it'll affect adults too, because if you're an adult on TikTok, you're going to have to validate your age in some way. So I think that was one of the interesting things for me out of the election. We've got all of these things happening that the political parties are not able to respond to, don't know how to deal with. And so you've got Labor and Liberal Party ganging up on the minor parties on campaign spending, on campaign donations, and further attempts to censor social media and censor discussion. Well, I think on the topic of media, we should talk about the fact that the ABC has finally axed Q&A. So 3 for 3. So net zero's gone. Net zero's gone. Australians split like the flag, and Q&A is finished. Q&A's dead. So, and the project. The project. The project. You didn't mind it. I didn't mind the project, and this is actually a serious point. But it was predictable. Yeah, it was predictable. But if Channel 10 and Comcast want to spend their money on programs that no one watches, that are so indelibly woke, that's okay. The challenge with the ABC is it's a public broadcaster, and if you're going to have a public broadcaster, which I don't think you should, But if you're going to have it, it has to have debate. So I was on Q&A, I think, 4 or 5 times. I remember once I made the mistake of pointing out to the studio audience that the climate is always changing, and I got booed. And then I came home and my wife said she'd seen me on the show, and I said to her, "How do you think I went?" And she said, "How do you think you went?" And I knew I was in strife.
You still get bailed up on that, don't you?
And I still get bailed up on it. But I think, there was a role for Q&A when it started some 18, 20 years ago. Podcasts hadn't really taken off. So Rogan started a few years later. Peterson started after that. The rest is Politics podcast, which I listen to, notwithstanding its political inclinations, is only 3 or 4 years old. The world passed it by, and then as the world passed it by and we went to other forums, the ABC had to appeal to its base audience, which became increasingly left-wing. It picked people to go on the show according to their identity, and there was every sort of diversity except diversity of opinion. And then my argument with the ABC is now that when Sky News really started to take off some 10 years ago, you didn't have to be a conservative and watch the ABC. You had alternative outlooks. So where the ABC goes, is a challenge. Kim Williams, as chairman, went to the press club. When was it? Some 6 months ago, and said he didn't even listen to Joe Rogan. So that's.
But he still said that he plays on.
He doesn't listen to Joe Rogan, but he thinks Joe Rogan, plays on fear and anxiety. And as I've said to a few people, Kim Williams should have a look at the ABC's own coverage of climate change if you want to have a look at a broadcasting organisation that plays on fear and anxiety. So where the ABC goes is a very live question. The ABC used to have Late Line. It used to have the 7:30 reports at the state level. It used to have Q&A. And the decline in the coverage of politics generally, I think, has been one of the things that has allowed for the decline of politics in Australia. The decline of politics coverage in Victoria has produced Dan Andrews and Jacinta Allen.
Well, I think the point about it becoming basically an echo chamber is right, because I was looking through the ratings of Q&A, and it actually held up pretty good. It was, I think its peak was 600,000 in 2020. So that
these were big numbers,
and this is relatively recently, so 5 years ago. But its lowest rating was in August 2023. So this is only 3 years after its peak of 600,000, and it crashed to just 84,000. And that was because they hosted the Gama special, which focused on, or partly on, The Voice.
And as Jared Henderson said in Media Watchdog, I think last week or the week before, he said they had a session on The Voice and everyone was a yes voter.
Yeah.
That's not debate. That's not interesting. And nor does it reflect the 60.06% of Australians who voted no.
Yeah. And this is what the ABC News director, Justin Stevens, said, and I like the spin he puts on it. He said, we always need to keep innovating and renewing. And in the 2 decades since Q&A began, the world has changed. It's now time to rethink how audiences want to interact and to evolve, etc. So that's code for no one's watching the program anymore, so we killed it. So, I wanted to ask you...
3 out of 3.
3 out of 3. Net Zero is going to...
Flag Q&A,
and I'll add the project, even though you've got a soft spot for it. That's all right. I wanted to ask you about that book you've been reading.
I have been reading, I've been meaning to read for a long time, The Psychology of Totalitarianism by a Belgian psychologist, Matthias Desmet. It was written post-COVID, and I happened to be finishing it the week that Scott Morrison got his AC for handling COVID, or as some would say, not handling COVID. And the fact that Scott Morrison can still show his face in public surprises people like me. But the point of the Desmet book, and this has had a lot of discussion internationally, is that when we look to not just the origins of authoritarianism, but totalitarianism more broadly, when we look at what happened to COVID, so many people put it down to fear. And I did at the time, and I think that played a big role. But Desmet's insight is that in addition to fear, It was loneliness. It was loneliness as a world of hyper-individualisation and hyper-liberalism disconnects us from our jobs, from our families, from our community. We look for a sense of belonging. There is no sense of faith or religion anymore in much of Western society. And so we're alienated. We are looking for belonging. Along comes a virus. Along comes an enemy that allows us to fight against. And we could also then fight against people who refuse to fight against the enemy. And it's a powerful, powerful study of, as he calls it, mass formation, how a big group of people can all come to think the same thing at the same time. And he also talks about then the importance of a minority of people, and often it's a minority standing up for what they believe and creating debate, identifying that things are not going well and talking about alternatives. So it's a very powerful book. It came out, I think, when was it, 2022. It had a lot of publicity. I've only just got around to reading it, and I would highly recommend it. We're only 6 months away from Christmas. Give it to your friends and loved ones.
Yeah, or you can give it on the anniversary of Daniel Andrews' election, November. So do you, I mean, I think the only positive I could take out of COVID and the lockdowns is that it ended eventually, right? So at least it came to an end. There was no guarantee that it would have ended when it did. So that was because of do you reckon that's because people standing up? Do you reckon, why did it come to an end when it did? Why didn't it keep rolling on?
I think that's a really powerful question. So it's as powerful a question as not why did it start in the first place, but why did it
end? Yeah.
Why did it end?
Did the community turn against it?
No. I don't think the community turned against it. I think there were a bunch of factors. One, people were slowly starting to acknowledge that perhaps there were different answers and solutions to overcoming COVID. That most of the predictions did not come true, and that, as we saw with Dan Andrews' private polling, the people were slowly getting sick of the restrictions. I would love to say the people rose up as one.
It only took 3 years.
Yeah, well, it did.
Yeah, it took a while.
But you know, this is one of the points Desmet makes. It's very hard for people to admit that they've been lied to, that they have been fooled themselves, that they believed they were doing the right thing. So if you believe you're doing the right thing for 3 years and not seeing your grandparents and managing your kids locked up in their bedroom and being without work and seeing the destruction of the community, as Dan Hannon has written very powerfully about, you don't want to say, was it worth it? You have to keep on explaining things to yourselves. And you know, it's very powerful. And what the book does is it goes into not just the fear, as I said, but it goes into the sense of alienation. And you had told me actually the other day that I hadn't come across, I think I'd heard of the book by David Grieber, Bullshit Jobs.
Yes.
You told me you'd come across it.
Yeah, I haven't read the book because it's too long. It's a bullshit book. But he started it with his thesis started with an essay, which was a good essay.
Yeah, like Fukuyama, and then they make it a book.
Yeah, it was long enough.
Yeah.
And then I got the book.
Yeah.
And then I'm like, I didn't learn anything beyond the essay. But it's worth reading. The essay is worth reading.
But Desmet makes the point. He says 37% of people, when asked whether their job makes a meaningful contribution to society, say no.
And how many?
And 13% are unsure. So half of people working in jobs in the West believe their job has no value. And then he goes on to ask, well, why is it that society can accommodate these jobs that have no value to society or to individuals? And he discusses meaningless work, and he has this lovely description. Today's executives of big companies rarely have a true personal stake in the success or failure of the company they lead. They can afford to create pointless jobs, perhaps to do friends a favour or to give the company a sophisticated image, by employing any manner of experts, if need be, even solely to optimise their employment statistics. By the time the company goes bust, the executive will have been employed elsewhere for a while anyway. So we were talking about Q&A. The former executive of Q&A, executive producer, left long before Q&A finished. Of course, he's now working for a Teal.
Well, I can't think of a better place to end it than that.
Thank you, Dan.
Let's leave it there. That'll do for today.